He ran through the rain, soaked to the bone, his shoes ruined and his heart pounding, not from nerves about the job interview he was already late for, but because he had just given up everything to save a stranger. What he didn't know was that the soaked, stranded woman he helped on the street was the same woman waiting to interview him. Marcus Green woke up before the sun. The alarm clock buzzed sharply at 5 a.m., but he was already awake, lying in bed with his eyes open. This day had been circled on his mental calendar for weeks. It was the first real job interview he'd landed in months, and he wasn't going to blow it. Living on the edge of the city, in a tiny apartment with a leaky ceiling and barely working heat, Marcus had scraped by doing odd jobs and hustling for day labor whenever he could, but none of that offered stability. This job, a junior position at a respected tech firm, could change everything. He had planned it all out. His one good shirt was ironed the night before. His resume had been printed at the library, neatly tucked into a folder. He shaved with a cheap razor in the cracked mirror above his bathroom sink. No breakfast, he couldn't risk spilling anything on his clothes. By 7 a.m. he was out the door, even though the interview wasn't until 10. Better early than sorry, he told himself. The morning was dark and overcast, with a heavy gray sky hanging low over the city. As Marcus walked briskly down the block, toward the subway station, fat drops of rain began to fall. Within minutes it turned into a downpour. He didn't have an umbrella, couldn't afford one after paying rent, but he kept walking, head down, using his resume folder to shield his face. He was halfway to the station when he noticed a car pulled over at the side of the road. A woman stood next to it, pacing, clearly distressed. One of her tires was flat, and she kept glancing at her phone, probably waiting for roadside assistance. But this neighborhood was quiet, far from downtown, and no help seemed to be coming. Cars sped past, splashing water as they avoided the puddles. People walked by with umbrellas, but no one stopped. Marcus slowed. His first instinct was to keep going. This interview was too important. Helping her would mean getting even more soaked, maybe completely ruining his appearance, and he'd likely be late. He glanced down at his soggy shoes, then up at the woman. She looked like she had no idea how to fix the tire. Her dress pants were already splashed with mud. She didn't notice Marcus watching her. His heart thudded with conflict. Every voice in his head screamed at him to move on, but another voice, the quieter one, the one he had learned to trust, said, "This is the right thing to do." He sighed deeply, walked toward her and said, "You need help." The woman looked up, startled. "Yeah," she said, breathless. "Flat tire. I have a meeting I'm already late for. I called for help, but they said it'll take an hour." "Pop your trunk," Marcus said simply. She hesitated but did as he asked. He pulled out the spare tire and jack and knelt down in the muddy street. Rain poured down on him as he worked, his shirt clinging to his back, his hands turning black. With grease and grime, the lug nuts were tight, but he forced them loose. The woman offered to help, but he just shook his head and smiled. "I got this." 20 minutes later, the spare was on. He wiped his hands on his already ruined slacks. "You're good now," he said, standing up. She stared at him in disbelief. "Thank you," she said. "You didn't have to do that." Marcus just shrugged. "Couldn't walk by and leave you stuck. People don't do that enough anymore." She reached into her bag, pulling out her wallet. "At least let me know." He cut her off gently. "I'm already late for something important, but I don't want money. Just pay it forward." He turned and walked off, not waiting for a reply. His shoes squished with every step, his hair dripping. He was going to be late, maybe very late, but somehow, despite the ache in his knees and the chill setting into his bones, he felt a strange peace. He didn't know it yet, but this small, selfless choice was about to rewrite the entire course of his life. By the time Marcus reached the office building, his clothes were completely soaked, and his once neatly prepared resume folder had turned soft at the edges, the ink smudged just enough to ruin the sharp presentation he had worked so hard on. The lobby of the glass tower felt cold, both in temperature and in energy. He stood out, wet, tired, and clearly out of place among the sharp suits and polished shoes. The receptionist, a young woman with perfect makeup and an air of practiced disinterest, looked up from her screen with mild irritation. "Can I help you?" she asked, already glancing back at her computer. "I am here for the interview," Marcus said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Marcus Green, I had a 10 a.m. slot." She checked her screen, tapped a few keys, then raised her eyes again, this time with a flat expression. "Mr. Green, it's almost 11:15. That interview block ended over an hour ago. They've already met with the other candidates." Marcus swallowed hard, feeling his throat tighten. "I know, I'm sorry, something happened on the way here. I helped someone, her car had a flat tire and she looked stranded. I couldn't just leave her there. It took longer than I expected." The receptionist raised an eyebrow. Whether it was skepticism or just disinterest, Marcus couldn't tell. "I'm sorry," she repeated. "They're in meetings now. I can't squeeze you in." He stared at her for a long second, then nodded slowly. "Is there anyone I can speak to? Maybe reschedule?" She picked up the phone, made a quick call, and then after a short wait, shook her head. "They've moved on to the next round of interviews. HR says the position will likely be filled by the end of the day. There's nothing more we can do at this point. Marcus nodded again, but this time it was more out of numbness than acceptance. He backed away from the desk, muttered a polite thank you, and turned to leave. As he stepped out of the building, the rain had slowed to a drizzle, but his heart felt heavier than ever. Each step down the sidewalk was filled with the weight of lost opportunity. He found shelter under a bus stop and sat down, his wet clothes sticking to his skin. He let out a long breath, trying to keep it together. So much hope, so much effort gone, all for a decision he couldn't regret, even though it cost him everything. He had made the right choice. He knew it. But why did doing the right thing always seem to hurt the most? People walked by without noticing him. He looked around at the city, the cold faces, the rushing bodies. It felt like the world had no space for people like him, people who tried to do good but didn't fit the mold, didn't have the polished resume, the expensive clothes, the connections. He reached into his soggy pocket and pulled out the crushed paper that was once his resume. It tore slightly as he unfolded it. He chuckled under his breath, not because it was funny, but because it was just so perfectly tragic. This paper had been his ticket, or so he thought. Now it was just trash. Still, there was no anger in him. Disappointment, sure, but not anger. Deep down, Marcus believed in something that the world often seemed to forget, that doing good mattered. That maybe, somehow, it would come back around. He looked up at the gray sky and let the light rain fall on his face. He didn't know what his next move was. He'd have to find another job listing, rewrite his resume again, hope for another shot. It was exhausting to even think about. But he also knew something had shifted in him. Today, he chose to be the man he could be proud of, even if nobody else noticed. What Marcus didn't see was that someone had noticed. Far above the street, in the tall office tower he had just left, a woman was walking through the hallway, still brushing rainwater off her jacket. She had a meeting scheduled with a final interview candidate. But when she reached the reception desk and asked about him, the answer she got made her stop in her tracks. "Marcus Green," she repeated. "You said he left." "Yes," the receptionist replied. "He was over an hour late. HR said we couldn't see him." The woman frowned, her thoughts spinning. Then her eyes narrowed. "Find him," she said. "Now." Marcus had just made it to the corner of the block when his phone buzzed. The screen was barely readable through the raindrops smeared across it, but the number was unfamiliar. For a second he thought about ignoring it. He was cold, wet, and emotionally drained, but something inside urged him to answer. "Hello," he said, voice low and cautious. "Mr. Green," a woman's voice replied. "This is Claire from Cole and Hart Innovations. We're terribly sorry about earlier. Our CEO has requested to speak with you personally. Are you still nearby?" Marcus blinked, confused. "Wait, the CEO wants to speak with me?" "Yes," she said. "If you're willing, please return to the building. Someone will meet you in the lobby." His heart jumped in his chest, but he kept his voice even. "I'll be there in 5 minutes." He didn't know what to think. Had they changed their minds? Why would a CEO care about a late candidate? Had someone vouched for him? None of it made sense. But somehow, some part of him didn't feel surprised. Something about the day already felt strange, like it wasn't following the usual rules of life. He picked up his pace, jogging through the light rain, barely feeling the chill anymore. Back at the lobby, the same receptionist looked up as he stepped through the doors, soaked again. Her face shifted from indifference to confusion, then to forced professionalism. "You're here for Ms. Cole," she said, then gestured for him to follow a tall man in a sharp gray suit who had appeared from the elevators. They didn't make small talk as they rode up. The elevator chimed on the 25th floor, and Marcus stepped out into a sleek, glass-walled office space filled with quiet hums of productivity. Every surface gleamed, every person looked busy and important. He was led down a long hallway and finally stopped in front of a large door. "She's expecting you," the man said, opening it. Marcus walked in and froze. Behind the desk stood the woman he had helped that morning, the one with the flat tire. Her hair was still a little damp, and her heels sat beside her desk as if she had just taken them off. She looked up and smiled, and for a moment they simply stared at each other. "You," Marcus said softly, realizing. "Me," she replied with a gentle laugh. "Amanda Cole, see you." He stood stiff, unsure if he should sit or run. "I didn't know." "Of course you didn't," she said, walking around the desk. "That's what made what you did so real. You didn't help me because you thought it would benefit you. You didn't know who I was. You saw a person in need and stepped in, without hesitation." Marcus glanced down at his soaked clothes, suddenly self-conscious. I thought I missed my chance. I was sure I ruined it." Amanda shook her head. "You didn't ruin anything. In fact, you reminded me of something I don't see enough. Any more decency, selflessness. That's the kind of character we need at this company. Skills can be taught, but integrity that comes from within." He blinked, stunned. "You're serious?" "I'm very serious," she said. "I've sat through 5 interviews today. Polished resumes, perfect answers, but no soul. You showed more in one act of kindness than they did in an hour of talking, so I don't need to see your resume again. I want to offer you the position." Marcus felt like the ground shifted under him. "You're offering me the job?" "Yes." she said with a smile. And not just because you helped me, but because the way you helped me told me everything I needed to know about who you are. He didn't know what to say. For months he had been trying to prove he was worth something, fighting rejection after rejection. And now, because of the moment of pure instinct, choosing kindness over personal gain, he was being offered the very thing he thought he had lost forever. "Thank you," he finally said, voice thick with emotion. "You won't regret it." Amanda extended her hand, and he shook it. Her grip was firm, warm. "I know I won't," she said. And in that quiet, rain-dampened moment, the man who had just about given up found himself standing at the edge of a brand new beginning, one he never saw coming. Marcus sat across from Amanda Cole in her sleek, modern office, still trying to wrap his head around what had just happened. The events of the day had unfolded so fast it barely felt real. That morning he was patching up a stranger's tire on the side of the road. And now that same stranger, who turned out to be one of the most powerful women in the city, was offering him a job. He didn't know whether to laugh, cry, or just sit in stunned silence. His soaked clothes clung to his skin. His shoes squeaked every time he shifted in the chair. And yet none of that seemed to matter anymore. Amanda leaned back in her chair, watching him with a kind of calm curiosity, like she was still trying to figure him out. "I like people who act without expecting anything in return," she said, breaking the silence. "You could have easily kept walking, and honestly, most people would have. You risked your own opportunity to help someone you thought you'd never see again. That tells me you're not just here for a paycheck." Marcus nodded slowly. "I didn't even think about it that way," he said. "I just couldn't leave you there. I've been in that kind of spot before, helpless, stuck, and I know how it feels when no one cares." Amanda's expression softened. "You know, I was on my way to an investor meeting this morning. It was critical, millions on the line. If you hadn't helped me, I would have missed it. No cab would stop and my phone was down to 3%. I was panicking." "I had no idea," Marcus said, shaking his head. "I figured you were late for something important, but not like that," she smiled. "That's the thing, Marcus. You helped without needing to know the details. No questions, no expectations, just action." He sat back, letting her words sink in. For so long he had believed that doing the thing only made life harder, that goodness was a burden, not a reward. But here he was, sitting in a CEO's office, being praised not for a college degree or work experience, but for a decision made in the rain with muddy hands and a kind heart. Amanda stood up and walked to the wide windows that looked out over the city. The rain had finally stopped, and the clouds were beginning to part, letting shafts of light break through. We live in a world where people think success is all about being cutthroat, about outsmarting the next guy, doing whatever it takes. And sure, business can be brutal, but I believe that the best companies are built by people who actually care not just about results, but about each other. Marcus watched her carefully, noting how different she was from what he expected a CEO to be. She was sharp and confident, sure but not cold. She had empathy, a quality he didn't think people like her often showed. "I want to build a team that reflects those values," she continued. "It's not just about your resume, Marcus. It's about your character. You made a sacrifice today. And now, I want to return the favor, not out of pity but out of respect." He swallowed hard, overwhelmed by the weight of the moment. No one had ever spoken to him like that before. Not a boss, not a teacher, not anyone. Most people saw what he lacked: education, polished experience, status. Amanda saw something else. "Do you still want the job?" she asked finally. Turning to face him, he nodded, this time with no hesitation. "More than anything, good," she said. "Then we'll start you in our community outreach division. It's a smaller team, but they do important work and I think you'll fit in perfectly. You'll get proper training, a mentor, and a real chance to grow here." Marcus smiled, a real one this time. "Thank you. I won't let you down." "No you won't," she replied, as he left her office with a temporary badge clipped to his still damp shirt. Something in Marcus shifted, not just because he got the job but because he finally understood. Something he'd never quite believed before. The right choice might not always be easy, but it's always worth it, and sometimes, doing the right thing opens doors you didn't even know existed. In the weeks that followed, Marcus stepped into a world that once felt completely out of reach. Each morning he walked through the same towering glass doors where he had once stood, soaked and defeated, now holding his head a little higher, dressed in company-issued slacks, a crisp shirt, and an ID badge that carried his name and his dignity. He had joined the community outreach division, just as Amanda promised, working with schools, food banks, and neighborhood programs. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was meaningful, and Marcus felt like he belonged for the first time in a long time. The office buzzed with activity, and though he was new, his energy and sincerity quickly earned him the respect of his team. He didn't know all the technical terms or corporate etiquette, but he asked questions, listened carefully, and worked harder than anyone else. More importantly, he treated people kindly: receptionists, janitors, volunteers, everyone. Word of his story spread through the building quietly at first, whispered in hallways, then mentioned in team meetings. Some doubted it, until Amanda Cole herself confirmed it during a company town hall. She stood before hundreds of employees and told the story of the man who missed his own interview to help a stranger, not knowing she was the CEO. She described the rain, the broken tire, and the choice Marcus made that morning. "He reminded me," she said, her voice calm but strong, "that character is louder than credentials. That who you are when no one's watching is the truest resume of all." Marcus sat near the back that day, stunned and humbled as the crowd erupted into applause. He wasn't used to recognition. For most of his life, he had been invisible, judged by his clothes, his address, or the color of his skin. But now, he was being seen for something that had nothing to do with surface and everything to do with substance. Over time, he grew into his role, learned the ropes, and began leading small projects of his own. Amanda stayed in touch, checking in occasionally, not as a boss, but as someone who believed in him. And Marcus, in turn, never forgot where he came from or how close he had been to giving up. He made it a point to speak at community events, encouraging young people to believe that integrity still had value, that good things could come to those who did good, even if it didn't always happen right away. One rainy afternoon, months later, Marcus stood outside that same office building and looked up at the sky. The clouds mirrored the day everything had changed. But now, the rain didn't bother him. He knew storms didn't last forever, and sometimes it led you exactly where you were meant to be. Smiling to himself, he turned and walked back inside. He wasn't just starting a job anymore. He was building a life, one small choice at a time, and it all began with a decision to help, simply because it was right. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and leave a comment below. Subscribe to The Black Struggle for more powerful stories that inspire and uplift.